The most dangerous man in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who says nothing, because silence is never empty. It's a weapon. And while others defend themselves, explain themselves, or beg to be understood, he watches, he studies, and he waits. Silence creates tension, and tension creates power. Every predator knows this. The lion doesn't roar before it strikes. It crouches, still, silent, and deadly. The snake doesn't announce its bite. It coils in silence until the moment comes. Humans are no different. The man who fills the air with words makes himself predictable. His rhythm, his insecurities, his need to be believed, all exposed. But the man who says nothing forces everyone else to guess, and guessing breeds fear. Machiavelli warned, defending yourself is weakness. The moment you explain, you submit. A servant explains, a ruler doesn't. When you defend, you admit guilt. When you stay silent, you leave others in uncertainty. And uncertainty is where power lives. Think about it. When a scandal breaks, weak men rush to hold press conferences, release statements, beg the public for forgiveness. Strong men wait, they smile, they let the storm rage until the crowd grows tired, confused, and eventually forgets. The silence itself becomes their shield. So understand this: noise is cheap. Everyone can shout, everyone can argue. But silence is expensive. It forces the world to lean in, to fill in the blanks, to reveal itself to you. That is why the most dangerous man in the room is the silent one. Why does silence feel so heavy? Because the human brain hates a void. In the moment when no words are spoken, when the air is thick with stillness, the mind begins to race. It looks for answers, for patterns, for meaning. That emptiness becomes unbearable. We crave sound, we crave explanation, we crave anything that will break the tension. And when it doesn't come, we are forced to create our own story to fill the void. Psychologists call this the need for closure. It is the instinct to resolve uncertainty, to end the discomfort of not knowing. When someone pauses too long before answering, when someone refuses to explain themselves, when someone simply stares back at you in silence, your brain starts running wild. What are they thinking? Did I offend them? Do they know something I don't? Are they planning something against me? This is why silence feels so suffocating. It forces us to face not the other person, but ourselves. The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting our fears, our doubts, our insecurities. And in that reflection, we often make the silent man larger, stronger, more dangerous than he truly is. Think about interrogation rooms. Hollywood shows us the screaming suspect, pounding fists, shouting his innocence. That man is predictable. He is desperate. He is easy to read. But the man who sits calmly in his chair, who says nothing, who lets the silence drag on, that man unnerves even the most seasoned interrogator. His stillness becomes a shield. His silence becomes a weapon. Because nothing terrifies more than the man who cannot be moved. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few really know what you are. Silence gives you control over appearance. Because when you do not speak, you do not reveal. And when you do not reveal, you can appear to be anything. People will project onto you their fears, their respect, even their admiration. Silence lets you be a king, a monster, or a prophet, all without saying a word. This is why the courtroom is such a stage for power. Watch carefully. A lawyer who objects to every word looks insecure, frantic, desperate to control what cannot be controlled. But the lawyer who waits, who chooses his battles, who allows silence to linger after a question, he becomes magnetic. The jury leans in, straining to hear, giving his pauses more weight than another man's speeches. His silence becomes gravity. And history is filled with this same gravity. Julius Caesar was not the loudest voice in the Senate. He was often the last to speak, and when he did, the room stilled, because every pause, every silence, had built anticipation. His words landed like thunder, not because of their volume, but because of the silence that preceded them. Abraham Lincoln was mocked for being slow to speak, for letting long pauses stretch before answering questions. But those pauses made him appear thoughtful, wise, unshakable. His silence gave weight to every word he chose to release. And in our own age, the most powerful men in boardrooms know this instinctively. The CEO who speaks last is often the one who wins. By remaining silent, he forces everyone else to reveal their strategies, their fears, their ambitions. He does not need to rush. He does not need to prove himself. His silence makes him untouchable. Modern psychology confirms what Machiavelli already knew. Researchers discovered the pause effect. In negotiations, when one side makes an offer and then falls silent, the other side almost always rushes to fill the void by offering more, by conceding ground, by revealing their hand. Silence bends people. It makes them uncomfortable, and in that discomfort, they expose themselves. And this leads us to the most Machiavellian truth of all. When you speak, people judge your words. When you stay silent, people judge themselves. That is why the most dangerous men in history have always been the silent ones. They did not rush to defend themselves. They did not explain. They did not chase validation. They let others talk, overplay their hand, reveal their insecurities, and waste their energy. And when the moment was right, the silent man struck calmly, decisively, without warning. So remember this: in any confrontation, whether in politics, in business, or in your own personal life, the one who talks first almost always loses. The man who cannot stand silence will always betray himself, and the man who can endure silence, who can wield it as both shield and sword, will always come out on top. Because silence is not emptiness. Silence is power. Silence is not only psychological, it is strategic. Throughout history, the men who ruled understood that words are not only tools, they are liabilities. Every sentence you speak is a thread someone can pull, a door someone can walk through. But silence offers nothing to attack. It creates a wall, a mask, a mystery. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, where Machiavelli himself observed power at its most brutal, the most dangerous figures were not always the kings or princes shouting commands. Often, it was the quiet advisor in the corner, the man who spoke rarely, but when he did, everyone leaned in. That silence was not weakness, it was calculation. By withholding words, he forced others to reveal their ambitions, their fears, their betrayals. The same principle played out in the military strategies of great generals. Napoleon Bonaparte often let his marshals argue among themselves, presenting plans and counterplans, while he remained silent. He observed. He waited. Only after the noise had burned itself out did he speak, and when he did, his decision carried the finality of law. His silence wasn't absence, it was dominance. Even in the modern age, silence has shaped politics and business. When scandals erupt, some leaders destroy themselves by speaking too much, trying to explain, trying to defend. But the ones who survive, the ones who come back stronger, are those who refuse to be rushed. They wait until their silence becomes unbearable, until the crowd's hunger for words grows so desperate that even a single sentence sounds like revelation. Machiavelli captured this truth when he wrote that it is better to appear than to be. Silence is the ultimate appearance. It allows you to project strength without revealing your hand. It allows you to seem wise, even when you are only waiting. It gives you the patience to strike when the time is right, not when you are provoked. And here is the paradox that separates rulers from the ruled. The weak man uses words to defend himself, to convince others, to beg for understanding. The strong man uses silence to make others defend themselves, to make others reveal, to make others beg for his approval. In the game of power, silence is not passive. It is an active weapon. It is the pause before the sword. It is the stillness before the storm. And the man who can master it controls not just the room, but the minds within it. Every society, in every age, creates its predators. Some wore crowns plated with gold. Some wore uniforms heavy with metals. And some wore nothing at all, only a quiet stare that froze everyone in the room. What unites these men is not size, or wealth, or even brilliance. What unites them is silence. Think first of nature. A predator never announces itself. The wolf does not bark before it lunges. The eagle does not scream before it dives. The panther does not roar as it glides through the jungle floor. The predator moves in silence, and it is this silence that terrifies. The prey can hear the wind, the rustle of leaves, the pounding of its own heartbeat. but it cannot hear the predator, and that uncertainty kills long before the strike. Now look at men. The same archetype exists in human power. The man who speaks constantly, who interrupts to prove himself, who justifies his every move he is prey. He burns energy, he gives signals, he reveals weakness, his noise betrays him. But the man who sits still, whose face does not twitch, whose stare does not flinch, whose silence is heavier than words that man is predator. His stillness makes others nervous. His silence forces them to speak too much, reveal too much, expose too much. They break themselves on the void he creates. Royal courts knew this better than anyone. It was not always the king on the throne who was most feared. Often, it was the figure in the corner, the one who rarely spoke, but whose silence carried rumors heavier than proclamations. Who was he aligned with? What was he thinking? What was he planning? The whispers around him became more powerful than any words he could have spoken. He held power not through title, but through aura, and that aura came from silence. Machiavelli saw it firsthand in Florence. He watched rulers and courtiers, and he understood that silence was not emptiness, it was strategy. When a man spoke little, people filled the void for him. They assumed he knew more. They assumed he saw more. His silence became a canvas on which others painted their fears and their hopes, and often they painted him larger than life. Modern psychology explains this instinct. Humans are wired to read silence as dominance. When someone refuses to answer immediately, when someone lets the pause stretch, our brains elevate them. We assume they hold higher status, deeper knowledge, greater control. Even if it isn't true, perception bends reality. Silence does not only conceal, it magnifies. This is why great negotiators wait. They let the silence stretch until the other side cracks. This is why great rulers pause before they speak, turning every word into a verdict carved in stone. And this is why great predators in any room do not chase approval, do not scramble to explain, do not even attempt to be understood. They use silence as both shield and spear, absorbing attacks, then striking when the moment is perfect. But understand this, the silent predator archetype is not about being mute. It is not about hiding in shadows or shrinking from speech. It is about speaking so rarely, so decisively, that your silence becomes more feared than another man's noise. It is about creating the impression that every pause is deliberate, that every withheld word is strategy. When you master this, people begin to forget that silence is a choice. They begin to think it is a weapon, and they are right. Because silence does what noise never can. It forces the world to lean closer. It forces rivals to second-guess themselves. It forces entire rooms to submit before a strike is even made. The wolf kills with teeth. The panther kills with claws. But the most dangerous man? He kills first, with silence, long before he ever moves. Most men panic in conflict. The accusation comes, and instantly they rush to defend themselves. They explain, they justify, they insist on their innocence, as if the more words they spill, the more the truth will shield them. But here is the Machiavellian truth. The more you defend, the weaker you look. When someone attacks you and you respond with noise, you confirm the wound. You show them where you bleed. You teach them how to cut deeper next time. But when you meet accusation with silence, when you refuse to flinch, you reverse the burden. The attacker becomes the one under suspicion. The silence itself whispers, if the charge were true, wouldn't I be panicking? Wouldn't I be desperate to clear my name? Your stillness plants a doubt more powerful than any defense. Maybe there is nothing to defend at all. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He wrote that a ruler should never defend himself against slander, for to answer is to admit that the charge has power. Better to let the words rot in the air than to dignify them with explanation. Better to make silence the shield that turns the blade back toward the attacker. History remembers countless men who destroyed themselves not through guilt, but through defense. Their explanations became confessions. Their eagerness to speak proved the very weakness they were desperate to hide. Consider politics. A leader accused of corruption who rushes to explain every detail only multiplies suspicion. Each clarification invites new questions. Each denial breeds more doubt. But the leader who stands calm, who refuses to dignify accusations, often survives untouched. His silence becomes armor, while the noise of his accusers makes them look frantic, petty, insecure. In the war of perception, it is not innocence that matters. It is control. In debates, silence is just as lethal. Watch carefully. The man who speaks first often reveals his hunger. He shows his insecurity, his desperate need to be heard. But the man who waits, who listens without expression, who forces his opponent to fill the silence with endless justification, that man always holds the upper hand. He doesn't win by argument, he wins by gravity. His silence forces his rival to bleed words, and in the flood of words, weakness always emerges. Picture a cold general seated at the table while his officers argue. He does not raise his voice. He does not join the noise. He watches. He waits. And when he finally speaks, his words sound carved in stone because they are the first calm notes after the storm. Picture the stern father listening to his son's excuses in silence. The boy stammers, explains, grows frantic. The silence itself becomes judgment, heavier than any shouted rebuke. Picture the rival who smirks but refuses to respond, leaving his opponent's insult hanging in the air unanswered. Who wins in these moments? Not the man with the most words, but the man with none. Even in insults, silence is a weapon. To respond with anger proves you were wounded. To explain proves you were shaken. But to look back calmly, to say nothing at all that breaks the attacker. His words fall into a void, and the void swallows him. The silence becomes louder than any reply. The crowd feels it. The attacker feels it. The absence of reaction crushes him more than 1,000 counterattacks ever could. And this is why the most dangerous man never rushes to answer. He never lowers himself to petty arguments. He never gives away the satisfaction of a defense. His silence is not absence. It is dominance. In every confrontation, silence decides who controls the ground. The man who can hold his silence in conflict holds the power of perception, the power of doubt, the power of control. And that power is worth more than innocence, more than truth, more than explanation. Because truth can be argued, innocence can be denied, but silence cannot be touched. Silence simply stands, and in standing, it wins. Silence is not only power in conflict, it is also power in mystery. And mystery, more than anything else, bends human imagination. People cannot resist the unknown. They cannot resist the blank space. When you refuse to reveal yourself, when you answer questions with nothing but a pause, when you let silence cloak your intentions, you become larger than life. This is why the quiet man in the corner is always noticed more than the loudest talker at the table. The chatterer fades into noise, but the man who says nothing becomes a shadow that demands attention. People whisper about him, speculate about him, invent stories to explain his presence. The mystery he creates by saying nothing gives him more gravity than all the shouting voices combined. His silence does not erase him, it multiplies him. Machiavelli understood this instinct. He wrote that men judge more by appearances than by reality, because appearances are what everyone can see, while truth is known only to a few. Silence gives you command of appearance. When you do not explain, when you withhold, others are forced to explain for you. And their imagination, their fears, their doubts will almost always paint you as more dangerous, more brilliant, more powerful than you really are. In silence, you become whatever they most fear, or whatever they most desire. Nowhere is this clearer than in Seduction. The man who floods the air with compliments, who explains his every gesture, who makes his hunger obvious, he kills desire with noise. He shows too much, too soon, leaving nothing for the imagination. But the man who holds back, who lets his silences stretch, who answers questions with half smiles and pauses, he becomes irresistible. Curiosity consumes the other person. They lean in, they guess, they invent. His silence becomes attraction itself, because curiosity is the most powerful form of desire. In leadership, the same law applies. The boss who never stops talking becomes background static. His words lose weight because there are too many of them. But the leader who speaks rarely, whose silences make his people wonder, whose pauses make them anxious to know what he is thinking, this leader controls the room without effort. His mystery becomes presence. His silence becomes command. People measure their actions against his imagined judgment, even when he has said nothing at all. Mystery is also freedom. It frees you from the prison of definition. A man who explains himself, who tells the world who he is and what he believes, becomes trapped in his own cage of words. He must defend that image forever. But the silent man is never pinned down. He can be feared and admired at the same time. He can be doubted and respected in the same breath. Because no one knows his truth, he is free to be anything. Look at history. Talleyrand, the French diplomat, was famous for his silence. In the chaos of revolution and empire, when others argued and shouted, he stayed quiet. People feared him more than louder men because his silence suggested depth and calculation. They assumed he knew everything, when in reality he simply revealed nothing. His mystery made him indispensable, even to emperors. Even in everyday life, this law operates. The man at a party who speaks the least becomes the one people remember. The colleague who sits quietly in a meeting often influences more than the one who fills the air. Because silence does not erase presence, it amplifies it. The mystery makes people turn toward you, wonder about you, revolve around you. And here lies the paradox. Silence does not make you invisible. It makes you unforgettable. A noisy man is forgotten as quickly as his words fade, but the silent man lingers. His absence becomes presence. His mystery becomes legend. Silence is not natural. From the moment we are children, we are trained to speak, to answer, to explain ourselves. Teachers reward the first hand raised. Parents demand justification for every mistake. Society praises those who can fill the air with clever words, quick answers, endless commentary. And so, silence feels unnatural, even painful. But this pain is exactly why it is powerful. To master silence is to rewire yourself against everything you were taught. It is not enough to know silence works. You must practice it until it becomes instinct. You must carry it, not only in moments of conflict, but in every interaction, every pause, every glance. Machiavelli wrote that a prince should train for war in times of peace, so that when the storm arrived, his hand did not tremble. The same is true of silence. You cannot wait until the accusation, the insult, or the crisis comes. You must already have trained your tongue to stay still, your face to remain unreadable, your presence to remain firm. The first discipline is restraint. In conversation, resist the reflex to answer immediately. Let the pause stretch. Most men fear silence in dialogue more than they fear the question itself. They rush to fill the void, spilling truths, revealing weakness, exposing insecurity. When you resist, you invert the power dynamic. The silence becomes a mirror, forcing them to reveal more and more, while you reveal nothing at all. Restraint is control, and control is power. The second discipline is patience. Do not rush to correct lies told about you. Do not scramble to explain your every move. Do not rush to win the room with noise. Let time do the work that words never can. A lie shouted, "Today will wither tomorrow," if you let it rot in silence. Most men cannot last a single hour under accusation without defending themselves. They panic, they explain, they confess weakness by the very act of answering. But the man who endures, who waits a day, a week, a month watches as doubt shifts back onto the accuser. The longer you endure, the more powerful you become, because silence stretches time in your favor. The third discipline is observation. Silence is not emptiness, it is a weapon for gathering intelligence. Every word you hold back is energy redirected toward watching, listening, reading the field. In silence, you hear what others reveal when they think you are passive. In silence, you notice the cracks in their tone, the tremors in their voice, the subtle betrayals in their body language. Every pause becomes a test. Every stare becomes an interrogation. Noise blinds. Silence reveals. But training silence is not glamorous. It is uncomfortable. At first, it feels unbearable. You will itch to speak, to justify, to prove yourself, to soften the tension. Your entire upbringing has taught you that silence is awkward, that silence must be broken. To resist this programming takes practice. But every time you resist, you sharpen the blade. Every time you hold back, you forge steel in your own mind. This is why silence is not weakness, but mastery. Most men cannot control the urge to speak. Their mouths betray them before their minds even know what they are doing. But the man who controls his tongue controls himself. And the man who controls himself can never be controlled by others. The truth is simple. Silence is not the absence of speech. Silence is the presence of mastery. It is proof that you command yourself. And once you command yourself, you can command the room, the battlefield, the boardroom, the court, because all power begins with control of the self. Noise dies quickly. Shouts echo for a moment, then fade into nothing. Speeches, no matter how fiery, are forgotten once the crowd disperses. But silence lingers. It seeps into memory. It breeds speculation long after the moment has passed. And this is why silence is not only power in conflict, not only power in mystery. Silence is also power in legacy. Think of how the dead are remembered. Often, it is not the words they spoke that echo through time, but the things they left unsaid. Their silence becomes a canvas for legend. People ask, what did he mean? Why did he pause? Why did he never explain? And in the absence of answers, myth is born. Machiavelli knew this intimately. Exiled from Florence, disgraced and silenced by politics, he did not scream his defense to the world. Instead, he wrote, and even in his writing, he left gaps, paradoxes, puzzles that have kept men debating for centuries. Was he advising rulers to be ruthless, or was he mocking them? Did he believe in cruelty, or was he warning against it? His legacy endures precisely because of what he did not clarify. His silence made him immortal. This principle appears everywhere in history. Consider George Washington. He was offered the chance to become king, to seize absolute power. He said nothing. He simply stepped down after 2 terms. That silence, the refusal to justify, the refusal to cling, spoke louder than any speech. It created a tradition of peaceful transfer of power that shaped a nation. His silence became his legacy. Or look at the art of warfare. The most feared generals were often the quietest. Their plans were never fully explained, their intentions never fully revealed. Napoleon's enemies trembled not because of what he declared, but because of what they could not predict. His silence before a campaign forced entire nations into paranoia, guessing where the strike would fall. His legacy was built as much on silence as on battle. Silence also creates a myth of depth. The man who says little, whose thoughts are never fully revealed, is remembered as profound. His pauses are mistaken for wisdom, his restraint for genius. History often inflates such men into legends far larger than their true selves. Why? Because imagination outlives explanation. Words limit you to what you said. Silence allows others to keep adding, building, exaggerating until you become more than human. In leadership, this becomes a conscious strategy. The ruler who refuses to explain every decision, who lets mystery surround his motives, is remembered as decisive, even visionary. The one who over-explains fades quickly into obscurity. The lesson is clear. If you want your influence to outlive you, say less. Let others argue, guess, and mythologize. Your silence will carry you further than your speeches ever could. Even in personal life, silence leaves a mark that noise cannot. The man who storms out in rage is remembered for a day. The man who sits silently, who refuses to explain, who walks away without a word, he haunts memory for years. People replay the silence in their heads, searching for meaning. And in that search, you grow larger in their minds. This is the paradox of legacy. What you do not say often defines you more than what you do. The crowd forgets noise, but they cannot forget the man they could not understand. So, when you think of your own legacy, remember this. Every word you speak ties you to a fixed image. Every explanation narrows what you can be, but silence leaves space. Space for others to imagine, to exaggerate, to mythologize. And in that space, you become more than a man. You become a symbol. Silence, held long enough, outlives empires. It outlives enemies. It outlives even the truth. The most dangerous man is not remembered for what he shouted, but for what he left unsaid. We began with a paradox, that the most dangerous man in the room is not the one shouting, but the one who says nothing. Now you understand why. Silence is not weakness. It is not hesitation. It is the highest form of control. Machiavelli saw this clearly. He lived in courts of betrayal and blood, where words could crown a man one day and condemn him the next. And he wrote not for dreamers, but for survivors. His advice was brutal, simple, eternal. Never explain, never defend, never reveal more than you must. Because the world judges by appearances, and silence is the most powerful appearance of all. Think of the archetypes you've met across history: the rulers who spoke last and were obeyed first, the generals whose pauses weighed more than speeches, the predators who stalked without sound until the moment of strike. Their power was not in volume, but in gravity. And now, think of yourself. Every time you rush to explain, you shrink. Every time you defend, you confess. Every time you fill the air, you make yourself lighter. But every time you hold back, every time you let silence speak, you grow heavier. You become the one others lean toward, the one they whisper about, the one they cannot easily read or move. This is the paradox of silence. The less you give, the more you take. The quieter you are, the louder your presence becomes. Words fade, noise is forgotten, but silence endures. So remember this final law: the man who cannot be moved cannot be ruled, and the man who controls silence controls the room. The most dangerous man is not the one who wants to be heard. The most dangerous man is the one who can sit still, watching, waiting, until the world breaks its own silence first. If you've made it this far, it means you're not like most. Most people click away when things get uncomfortable. But if you stayed, it's because you hunger for power, for clarity, for the truths most are too afraid to face. That's exactly what I share here every week. Lessons from Machiavelli, from history, from psychology stripped of illusions, told as they really are. So if this spoke to you, if you felt the weight of these words, then subscribe. Not just to support the channel, but to sharpen yourself week by week into someone untouchable. And remember, silence is not weakness, it's mastery. Until next time, stay sharp and stay silent.